Hello everyone. In this lecture we will cover lecture 2. In this video lecture we will basically cover lecture 2 PowerPoint slide. Lecture 2 basically contains the first half of chapter 2 in your book. Okay, and then lecture 3, which will be next class, will be basically the remaining portion of chapter 2. Chapter 2 is pretty broad, so I had to divide it into 2 lectures so it is easy for you guys to understand. So the chapter 2 starts off about talking the economic problem. I know we talked about this a little bit last class, is that human wants are unlimited. As humans we want everything in we want everything. If possible we would have got everything we needed, right? So human wants are infinite, but the resources needed to produce the goods and services are limited in quantity. Again, the land, labor, capital and entrepreneur that we talked about last class, these are limited in quantity. So there is a problem, there is a gap between human wants and the resources that are needed to produce those goods and services required by the humans. So this gap is called the economic problem. So we talked about this in previous class, but officially this problem is called the economic problem, which means resources are scarce and human wants are infinite. So in order to there's the economic problem, and in order to solve this problem we have to allocate or distribute the resources efficiently, so we have to make choices that yields the maximum consumer satisfaction. Okay, so under the economic problem we look into macroeconomics. Basically macroeconomics is the study of larger systems such as Texas economy, US economy, in order to solve the economic problem. On the other hand, microeconomics is basically the study of smaller units such as businesses or consumers to solve the economic problem. So basically economics as a whole is a study to solve the economic problem. Microeconomics is when we deal with small individuals, like small groups such as individuals or businesses, and macroeconomics is when we are looking at a larger scale or larger systems such as the Dallas economy, the Texas economy, the US economy. So, and the main objective of these studies is to solve the economic problem, which is basically human wants are unlimited and resources are scarce or limited in quantity. So in light of that, there are two concepts that come into play. First one is called allocative efficiency or economic efficiency. So allocative efficiency and economic efficiency can be used interchangeably. They basically mean the same thing. What it means is there are three conditions in order for allocative efficiency to happen. First is consumer satisfaction is maximized. So when we are making choices, our satisfaction and our utility will be maximized. So consumer utility is maximized. Second is, from the producer side, the cost will be reduced or minimized. Okay, and third will be the output will be maximized. With the limited amount of resources, the output will be maximized. Okay, so I just want to point out there are three conditions. There are three conditions for allocative efficiency. Okay, first one is consumer utility is maximized. Okay, second is from the producer side, when the businesses are producing the good or service, they are producing at the minimum cost. So only then we are going to have allocative efficiency. So cost is minimized. And finally, output is maximized. So with the limited amount of resources, we are producing, or the businesses are producing, goods and services that are maximum in quantity, and the cost to produce these are minimum. And when consumers purchase these goods and services, their utility or their satisfaction is maximized. When all these three conditions are met, then we have allocative efficiency, or also known as economic efficiency. This is an ideal situation. All economies want to be at this situation, okay, where consumers are also happy and at the same time producers or businesses are also happy, because businesses, they're producing maximum output at the minimum cost so they can make money, and on the other hand consumers are also most happy. So both the sides are happy, and this is the most optimal type of situation we would like to have in an economy. Okay, So that's allocative efficiency. Now, the other type of efficiency is known as the productive efficiency. Productive efficiency only focuses on the producer side or on the business side. So basically what it means is, basically it is very similar to allocative efficiency, but what productive efficiency means, this is another type of efficiency, but this focuses on the business sides, and this happens when cost is minimized and then output is maximized. But consumer satisfaction is not maximized, or we do not have any information about consumer utility or consumer satisfaction. So that's the basic difference between allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. So allocative efficiency considers consumers and producers. Productive efficiency only focuses on producers or businesses, and productive efficiency is achieved when the cost to produce a good is minimized and the output, with limited number of resources, we are producing the maximum quantity of the goods. Okay, so that's when we are going to have productive efficiency. And under productive efficiency, we do not know if consumer satisfaction has been maximized, or in reality consumer satisfaction has not been maximized. Producer can be efficient on their side, but consumers might not want that good. So in that case, we will have productive efficiency. An example of productive efficiency would be, let's consider the production of aircrafts or missiles. Maybe the producers who are producing, or the businesses that are producing missiles, they are producing it with limited number of resources and the maximum output, and the cost is minimized. But the general public or general consumers do not want this missile. They don't want this missile. It does not affect their daily lives, right? So it may be required by the government, but overall the general consumers do not want this. So consumer satisfaction is not maximized. So that is an example we can refer to in terms of productive efficiency. Now this is very important. You have to understand the difference between allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. You will have questions in your homework and your exam, so make sure you understand, and in the slide it gives you a little bit more information, so it will help you to understand the two concepts. So again, because resources are limited in quantity and our wants are infinite, we have to allocate or distribute the resources. And when we are allocating the resources, there are 4 questions that we have to answer. The first one is what to produce. Okay, so what goods or services will be produced? Should we produce leather jackets? Should we produce wool jackets? Should we produce clothes, or should we produce cars? So the question is, the first question is, what items need to be produced in the economy and how much quantity needs to be produced? Okay, so this question, under what to produce, it basically means what goods or services are produced and how much of each of these goods and services are produced. And under a market-based system, this question is answered by the consumers. Us, when we are trying to buy something, based on our demand, producers will take up production. Okay. The second question is how to produce. So that's a question that is answered by the businesses or producers, right? Once we have determined what the demand is, or what the demand is in the market, producers then determine how they can produce. So let's say there is a demand for leather jackets in the market now. In order to produce leather jackets, how can they produce it? What are the resources they need to produce leather jackets? What type of labor they need? Do they need tailors? They need stitchers. What type of materials they need? They need leather, they need buttons, they need chains. Okay, what type of machines or capital they need? They probably need a sewing machine, they probably need a cleaning machine. So producers will bring all these resources together in an efficient combination to produce the good. That is what is answered under how to produce. Basically producers, once they know what the demand is, they will bring the different type of factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur, under one roof, or they will combine it efficiently with the correct amounts, and then they will produce the good. The third question is who to produce for. So basically, when they are producing the good, what this question means is, once the goods have been produced by the businesses, how these goods will be distributed among the population, how they will be distributed in the rural areas, how will be distributed in the cities or in the metroplexes. So that's the question that is answered under who to produce for. Okay, and finally the final question is efficiency and power. So basically this says, is there competition in the market or not? Are there many producers producing? If there is a lot of competition, that is good. Basically if there is a lot of competition, mean there is a lot of producers producing leather jackets, and that means the output is going to go up, right? The higher the number of producers, the higher the number of goods, which is good for the economy, because output is maximized and consumer satisfaction is also maximized. So if there is competition, and if we have competition, output will be maximized, which eventually means we are going to have allocative efficiency. So that's the ultimate goal. So the next question under efficiency and power is basically, is there competition, or is the production controlled by one entity or one business? So that's a question that is answered under this section. So these are the 4 questions when we are allocating resources. Another concept that the book talks about is called the standard of living. Standard of living, I'm sure most of you heard about this term. What it means is, it determines the amount of resources that are available and how efficiently they are used. Okay, and standard of living is a good indicator of how the economy is doing. Okay, it is usually measured in terms of GDP, and it is a measure of our material welfare. If the standard of living of an economy is going up, that means it's good. The overall amount of resources used in the economy is going up, and they are used more efficiently. That's what it means. Developed countries have higher standard of living than developing countries, because they have more resources in quantity, and at the same time the resources are used more efficiently. Okay, then we turn our gears into the 4 factors of production. Now, last class we discussed that there are 4 types of resources, or 4 types of factors of production. They are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Although we talked about it, we have not discussed in details what each of these categories include. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about what is included in land, what is included in labor, and what is included in capital and entrepreneurship. So land is the first factor of production. Land basically constitutes all land, basically whatever the physical land we have, that plus all natural resources and all minerals. Okay, so under land we will have all the raw materials needed, all the natural resources needed, all the minerals needed, and as well as the physical land that we need to perform any type of production. Okay, so let's do an example. So let's say we are trying to produce clothes. What would be something that is a land used in the production of clothes? So for clothes, it will be cotton. Cotton is a raw material or natural resource that is used in the production of clothes, and that will be classified under land. Now let's say we are talking about website. In that case, silicon, which is used to produce the chips, is the natural resource, and that is gonna be classified under land. So hopefully that clears. It means it's all the natural resources, and all the minerals needed to produce a good or service. Okay, so the next factor of production is called labor. Labor is very easy to understand. In order to make something, in order to make a car, or in order to make a cloth or a t-shirt, or in order to make a shoe, some level of human effort is needed. Okay, so labor refers to the time and the talent of humans that is mixed in order to produce a good and service. If we are going to workplace, we are spending time and using our talent and skills and qualifications, all that will be classified under labor. And labor is a very important factor of production, because it is tied to the society's standard of living. What it means is, the higher the skill, the higher the skills of labor, the higher the standard of living of an economy. Okay, so it's basically labor refers to the time and the talent and skills that people use, and the combination of these that people use at workplace. The third one is called capital. Now, capital can be divided into two types. One is the economic capital, and the other is the financial capital. Economic capital basically means all types of man-made tools, facilities, and equipment that are needed for the production of goods and services. Okay, so when we are using any type of machines to produce goods and services, let's say in order to produce clothes, we need stitching machines. So that is economic capital. It also includes facilities. Let's say we are leasing a space, we are leasing a factory space in order to produce clothes. That space will be considered economic capital. So basically, economic capital refers to any type of furniture, equipment, machine, tools, facilities needed to produce goods and services. Okay, examples would be, shovels, office building, computers, laptops, fans, AC. These are all types of economic capital. Okay, and the other type of economic capital is financial capital, which is easy to understand. It is basically the money used to purchase real estate or economic capital. Basically, financial capital refers to the dollar bills or the money that we use to buy something or to purchase a real estate. Finally, the last but the most important factor of production is called the entrepreneurial skill. Okay, so when a person meets three criteria, only then that person will be classified as an entrepreneur. Okay, so the first criteria is the person must be able to come up or conceive a business idea or innovate. So basically, I as an individual, let's say I have an idea to produce a t-shirt. So I must be able to come up with that idea or business idea or innovate. Okay, then the second criteria is I will take the risk to implement my idea. It's just coming up with the idea is not enough. I will take the risk. I will try to gather all the resources and I will take the risk needed, because when I am trying to produce something, let's say I'm trying to produce a type of t-shirt, maybe the consumers will not accept that t-shirt, right? So there is some level of risk out there in the market, but as an entrepreneur I will take the risk to implement my idea. So that's the second criteria. And third criteria is this person will bring all the other factors of production together in an efficient combination in order to produce the good. So basically they will bring the land, labor and capital together in an efficient combination and in the right quantities to produce the goods and services. When someone meets these three criteria, they will be categorized under entrepreneur. So basically it's the person who starts a business and produces goods and services. Now this is the most highly valued resource, as discussed last class. This is the most highly valued resource out of all the four resources, and they receive a profit, and they are well compensated if their business is doing well. Okay, and it is a unique characteristics of market economy. Only in a free market economy we will have entrepreneurs, like a US. In a command type of system, which we are going to look into it shortly, we will not have any entrepreneurs because the government is controlling everything. Okay, so only in a free market society we will have an entrepreneur. This is a unique type of factor of production that only belongs to a certain type of economic system. Okay, so moving on, then there are three basic types of economic systems in order to solve the economic problem. In other words, there are three different types of economic systems which have different methods to allocate and distribute resources within the society. The first one is called traditional, second one is called command, third one is called market. In between command and market there is another one called social, which is not mentioned in the book, but I just want to let you know because in certain parts of the world that is common now. But first let's try to discuss what traditional economic system means. Traditional economic system is basically a type of economic system in which we are allocating the resources based on our customs, beliefs, folkways as well as traditions. So here we are using our beliefs, traditions, culture to allocate resources among ourselves or in the society. That is a very primitive type of society, and it usually exists in some rural. We don't see this much in today's world, but there's some rural areas or some communities may have that, and examples of this would include fishing, agriculture, hunting, or a combination of any of these 3. And an example would be, let's say, the Mormons. They in Utah, they have their own culture, they have their own way of living, and they distribute the resources according to their culture and beliefs. So that would be classified under traditional economic system. The second type of system is called command economic system. Under this type of system, there is a strong government entity. So basically, government is controlling everything in the economy. Government decides how much everyone will get and what everyone will get. So let's say, the government is controlling everything, all the resources. They own all the resources, and they will decide how much I will get of rice, or how much of rice I will get, or how much of corn I will get. Same way, they will decide how much of corn will Tom get, how much of corn will Henry get. So government owns all the resources, and government decides how much and what individuals get in a society. There is no entrepreneur under this type of system. There is no entrepreneur. Okay, it allows very little private ownership, and investments and income, even income, is determined by the government. Okay, society is controlled by a few people. An example would be North Korea. Government controls what each individual will get, and or what items and how much quantity each individual will get. Okay, so that's command economic system. And lastly, we have the market-based economic system, or the free market economic system. That is an example. US is an example of that. What that means is consumers and producers, they are free to decide. They are free to make their own choices. They can interact freely in the market without any type of interference, and decide what they want to buy or how much quantity they want to buy. So producers and consumers interact freely to determine the allocation of the 4 types of resources. What is produced and how much is produced is determined by the supply and demand, and there is no artificial ownership, artificial interference, and there is private ownership of it. Most of the resources are owned privately. Okay, and also entrepreneur is one of a unique resource under this type of economic system. Now, in between command and market-based system, there is another system called social-based system. Here, some of the industries are partially controlled by the government, but the other industries are controlled by the private sector. An example would be Canada or England. In Canada, education and healthcare sector is controlled by the government, but all other industries are pretty much privatized. So that's social system, and that's something we also see in today's world. Okay, so moving on, the book then talks about Adam Smith. Adam Smith is basically the father of economics. He is the first one who came up with the concept of economics, and that's why he's called the father of economics. He basically provided the theoretical foundation of a free market economy, like how the economy in the US operates. He was the first one who basically came up with the theoretical foundation, and he addressed the question what to produce, and he said that this was answered by the consumers. Okay, he also came up with 3 different concepts. One is the productivity. Basically, productivity refers to the amount of work and utility of a worker's output. Productivity means how efficient a labor is in order to produce a good. So the greater the productivity, the higher the income for that individual. That's what Adam Smith said. Adam Smith also said that in a free market economy, there will be invisible hands, meaning that consumers and producers will interact freely, and overall the market process often will use to describe the benefits of competition. So there will be a lot of competition in the market. There will be a lot of producers, a lot of businesses producing goods, which means output will be maximized. Producers and suppliers can interact freely, and the market price is determined accordingly. Finally, he also talked about the laissez-faire role of government. What this means is government will have a very limited role in the economy. Government will be there to facilitate the market, but they will not interfere in any type of market interaction. So there will be limited role. They will be there to bring about market transactions or to facilitate market, but not to interfere in the market. These were the 3 concepts that were introduced by Adam Smith under the theoretical foundations of free market society. Then there's another economist that the book talks about, is called David Ricardo. This is a very important part of the class, David Ricardo is basically had very similar thoughts, like, or similar, very similar philosophy, like Adam Smith. He said, you know, there should be a free market economy and very little government activities. And then he came up with two concepts: absolute advantage and comparative advantage in when we are thinking in terms of production. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the definitions, and then I'm gonna do an example so it is clear to you guys. Absolute advantage basically means when we are talking about absolute advantage or comparative advantage, we are basically comparing one country to another. So make sure you understand this. Okay, so absolute advantage means it's the ability of a country to produce a particular or to carry out a particular economic activity more efficiently than another. Okay, so let's say with the same amount of resources, USA can produce 10 cars, but Canada can produce 8 cars. So we will say USA has absolute advantage because with the same amount of resources they can produce more units of output. So that's absolute advantage. When we are looking at the production of cars, USA has absolute advantage over Canada because they, with the same amount of resources, they can produce more cars. Okay, and they are more efficient at it. Now the other concept is called comparative advantage model or comparative advantage concept. This basically means is the ability of a country to carry out a particular economic activity more efficiently than another country and at a lower opportunity cost. So this concept looks into your opportunity cost. Remember we talked about opportunity cost in lecture 1. So this concept focuses on opportunity cost. Whichever country has the lower opportunity cost will engage in the production of that economic activity, and that country will have comparative advantage on that product compared to the other company. Okay, and based on that, because of comparative advantage, countries will specialize in trade. They will engage in trade because resources are limited. They cannot produce everything. So one country will produce, let's say, shoes, the other country will produce socks, and they will specialize in those, and then they will engage in trade. Okay, and the country that will specialize in the product will have lower opportunity costs in that product. So I know this is a little bit confusing, so I want to do a numerical example, and this type of example is very important for your homework as well as the exam, but it will help you to understand what we mean by absolute advantage and what we mean by comparative advantage. So let me move on and do the example. Okay, all right, so let's say we are given with this information with the same amount of resources. Okay, so we are considering two countries and with the same amount of resources. Okay, USA can produce either 10 apples or 20 berries. Okay, so it's or because our resources are limited, so we cannot produce apples and berries at the same time. So they can either produce 10 apples or 20 berries. And with the same amount of resources, Mexico can produce 25 apples or 75 berries. Okay, so this information is given to you, and now I will ask you questions based on this information for the concepts of absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Okay, so first thing what we will do is we want to put this into a table format which will help us to understand it easily. Okay, so we have two products, and in this class we will only look into two countries. We might have three products, but we will only look into two countries. So but now in this example we have two products, apples and berries. Okay, and then we have two countries, US and Mexico. Okay, so let's first look at the US. US can either produce 10 apples or because resources are limited, they cannot do both. We cannot make we cannot choose all the options. We have to make choices. So they can either produce 10 apples or 20 berries. On the other hand, Mexico can produce, with the same amount of resources, 25 apples and 75 berries, or 75 berries. Okay, so that's the first table. So based on this table, now let's look at it. Okay, so my first question is, who has absolute advantage on apples? Who has absolute advantage on apples, and who has absolute advantage on berries? Okay, so based on this table, with the same amount of resources, let's first look into apples. With the same amount of resources, let's look at this column first. USA can produce 10 apples and Mexico can produce 25 apples. So who can produce more? So basically Mexico can produce more. So Mexico has absolute advantage on apples. Has absolute advantage on apples. Okay. Then my next question is, who has absolute advantage on berries? Same way, we look at this column now. With the same amount of resources, USA can produce 20, whereas Mexico can produce 75. So clearly, Mexico again has absolute advantage. So absolute advantage is when we are comparing the actual quantities, and whoever can produce the higher quantity will have absolute advantage. Okay, so that's very simple. However, again, remember, resources are limited. So Mexico, although has high absolute advantage in apples and berries, they cannot engage in the production of both because resources are limited. They have to make a choice. They can either produce apple or they can either produce berries, and they need to trade the other product from US. Okay, so that's why we move on to the concept of comparative advantage, where we look into opportunity cost. Okay, so now based on this, let's say I ask you, who has comparative advantage? So who has comparative advantage on berries? So what our job will be when I ask you this question is, I will calculate the opportunity cost for USA and for producing one berry, and I will calculate the opportunity cost of producing one berry in Mexico. Then I will see who has the lower opportunity cost, and the country that has the lower opportunity cost will produce berries. Okay, so in this case, based on the example, based on the table, if you rewind a little bit, you will see the numbers again. So let's first calculate for USA. Okay, so in order to produce 20 berries, USA is giving up 10 apples. Okay, and in order to produce one berry, USA is giving up 20 divided by 10, or half apple. So that is the opportunity cost of one berry in USA. Now let's look at Mexico. Okay, same way we calculate the opportunity cost for Mexico for berries. So in order to produce 75 berries, what are they giving up? They are giving up 25 apples based on the table. So in order to produce one berry, they are giving up 25 by 75, or 1/3 apple. Okay, so which one is taller? Is half lower or is 1/3 lower? So in this case, 1/3 is lower. So that means Mexico has lower opportunity cost to produce berries, which means Mexico will be the country that will produce berries because they have lower opportunity cost, or because they have comparative advantage on berries, because they will have to give up less apples compared to USA. USA will have to give half apple, whereas Mexico will have to give up 1/3 apple in order to produce one berry. Okay, same way, if I ask you who has comparative advantage in apples, so now we are going to look at the opposite side. Who has comparative advantage in apples? Okay, so again, we look into US, we look into Mexico, and we find out the opportunity cost for each country. So now we look into the opposite side. Okay, so in order to produce 10 apples, we are giving up 20 berries. In order to produce one apple, we are giving up 20 divided by 10, or 2 berries. That's the opportunity cost of producing one apple. Whereas in Mexico, in order to produce 25 apples, we give up 75 berries. In order to produce one apple, we give up 75 by 25, which is equals to, we give up 3 berries. So in this case, look at it. US, the opportunity cost is 2 berries, whereas the opportunity cost in Mexico is 3 berries. So the opportunity cost is lower in US. So US has comparative advantage in apples, and US will engage in the production of apples. So that's what it's saying. Because resources are limited, countries cannot produce everything, number one. Number two, they will only produce the good that they have comparative advantage in. So based on this example, Mexico has comparative advantage on berries, so they will produce berries, and US has comparative advantage on apples because their opportunity cost is lower than Mexico, so they will produce apples. Okay, and then they will trade the two goods and services among themselves. One thing to remember is, if I say who has comparative advantage in apples, then in that case apples will be on this side of the column and berries will be on the other side. If I said who has the comparative advantage in berries, then berries would have been here and apples would have been here. So that's an easy way I'm telling you to make the calculations. Okay, now based on this information, okay, who will specialize in apples? Who do you think will specialize in apples? Who will So again, based on this information, US will specialize in apples because they have lower opportunity costs, and Mexico will specialize in berries. Okay, so Mexico will be berries because their opportunity cost is lower for berries. And then one final question I can ask is, now they will engage in trade, but they will only engage in trade when it is beneficial for both the parties. Okay, so what is the price? Let's say USA is engaged in the production of USA is engaged in the production of apples. So what price should USA charge to Mexico for one apple? Okay, what price? And this is very important because both the countries will benefit, that's why they will engage in trade. Okay, so easy way to understand is the opportunity cost for USA to produce one apple. To produce one apple, the opportunity cost is 2 berries. Remember, we calculate this, and this is for US. Okay, and in Mexico, the opportunity cost to produce one apple is 3 berries. That's the opportunity cost in Mexico, right? So in the international market, USA will charge anywhere between 2 and 3 berries to Mexico. Okay, that in that way both the parties will benefit, right? So USA basically will charge greater than 2 berries but less than 3 berries to Mexico. Let me tell you how. If USA charges more than 2 berries, their cost is 2 berries, but when they are charging more than 2 berries, they are making a profit right there, right? Because they are charging more than their opportunity cost. So that's a benefit for USA, because by charging higher than 2 berries, they are making profit. On the other hand, think about Mexico. For Mexico, if they produce in-house, the cost is 3 berries, but let's say if USA charges 2.5 berries, just as an example, they can charge 2.5 berries, they are able to cut costs by 0.5, and that is beneficial for Mexico because they are paying lower cost than 3 berries, right? So that makes sense. Now, if USA charges more than 3 berries, Mexico will not buy from USA. In that case, Mexico will produce in-house because it does not make sense. The opportunity cost is lower if they are if they are producing in-house. So in this way, if you see, when USA is charging more than 2 berries but less than 3 berries, it's benefiting both US because they are making profit, and it's also benefiting Mexico because they are paying less cost than their own opportunity cost. So that's how trade takes place, and that's how trade benefits both the parties engaged in this type of activity. So this is very important. There will be a problem like this in your homework and example and in your exam, so make sure you understand this example. Finally, we have a couple of other economists mentioned in chapter 2. Thomas Malthus, he basically said that the population will grow geometrically, 2, 4, 8, 18 at a geometrical rate, while food production will grow arithmetically. So he said at some point we are going to have a disaster because population growth will outpace food growth. But in reality, that did not happen, and that's because of technological improvement. Because there was improvements and advancements in technology, we were able to improve the food production system, and as a result, it matched the population growth over the economy, and we did not have any type of disaster. Then another economist, Robert Owen, he said industrialization of free market society has a lot of negative consequences, and we should focus more on society-based system. He's saying is that we should the focus should be more on the society rather than the individuals. Okay. And finally, we have Karl Marx. He's a very popular economist. He said that capitalism ultimately converts into a socialist economy, which ultimately converts into a communist society. That's exactly what happened in Russia, and that's what Karl Marx used to explain his theory. However, we don't have to know these in details, but we just have to know what each of these economists said in short. Okay, so I will stop here, and in lecture 3 we will continue chapter 2 and finish up chapter 2. But so far I know I covered a lot of it, so make sure you understand the examples and make sure you understand the concepts, and in the next video lecture I will pick up from the remaining portion. Well, until then, you guys stay safe, and thank you.